Hello and welcome to The Scoop, a new weekly discussion on the threats facing the Western world, being broadcast to you live from Millbank Tower in the heart of Westminster. While others are keen to play down the threats facing our democracy, values and societies, here we promise to give you the truth, straight and unvarnished. Just as importantly, we place to involve you, our audience too. This show is not about us talking and you listening. Instead, if you've got something to say, you can click the link in the video description just under where you are watching. You'll be redirected to our online studio and might get to ask one live. I can't promise we'll agree with you if you're called, but I can tell you we'll certainly engage with your point of view. Today, we'll be discussing the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has invaded the country on multiple fronts and is using increasingly desperate tactics, including indiscriminate attacks on civilians to get what he wants. The rest of the world has looked on appalled, but remains divided about how far to go to stop him. I'll be asking what Putin is after and what we should be doing to resist his aggression. Joining me at HTS Towers to discuss this subject is Magnitsky sanctions campaigner and Putin expert Bill Browder. Bill was, of course, once Russia's biggest foreign investor before being targeted by the Putin regime in a series of attacks which led to the tragic murder of his lawyer Sergei Magnitsky in a Moscow jail for daring to stand up for truth and justice. Since then, he has sparked a global movement to bring human rights malefactors to justice and has done more to hold the Kremlin to account as one man than many national governments. And don't forget, we want to hear from you during the show with your thoughts. To drop us a line, please click through on the link below or email reaction@htsscoop.org, and we will do our best to bring you into the discussion. Bill, thank you for being our first guest. It's a terrible time, obviously, but a subject you know a lot about. Let's start with, what is Putin after? What's he up to here?
Well, I'll tell you what he's not up to. This is not about ideology. It's actually not about NATO. And it's not about Ukraine. So what this is about is that Putin has been a dictator for 22 years. In that 22 years, he has stolen an enormous amount of money from the Russian people, money that should have gone to pay for healthcare, for education, for roads, for infrastructure, for government services, has been paying for his yachts, his oligarchs' yachts, villas, private jets, bank accounts in Switzerland, etc. And after a certain period of time, that's no longer very comfortable for the average Russian. And Putin had looked around, and 18 months ago, the people of Belarus rose up against their dictator, Lukashenko, and almost took him out. And it was only with Putin's intervention that he survived. A couple months ago, the Kazakh dictator Nazarbayev got cleaned out. And Putin saw the writing on the wall for himself. He said, I'd rather not get kicked out by my people. As a dictator, what do you do if you're trying to avoid getting kicked out by your people? You dig into the playbook, the dictator's playbook, and you start a war. And so, in my mind, this war is about him staying in power. This war is to distract the Russian people. And this war is to create a crisis situation where there's no way that he could be changed from his job as president of Russia.
That's a fascinating sort of set of insights into Putin the man, and staying with Putin the man. Obviously, there was a stage when you knew him fairly well. Looking at that Putin from 22 years ago to the Putin of today, there's a theory going around that he's gone mad. I prefer to think that he's always been bad, and this is just the latest example. But do you think there is something that's changed in him, or is this just the latest expression of his badness?
Well, it's kind of weird when he sits at these like 30-foot tables with all the guys at one end and him at the other. His face is looking puffy. He's sounding a little bit crazy. But let's not forget, this is not new. How did Putin come to power? Putin came to power by planting apartment bombs in apartments all over Moscow and other parts of Russia, blowing up apartment buildings, killing hundreds of people, blaming it on the Chechens, and then starting a vicious, unbelievable war where he carpet bombed Chechnya and killed thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. That was his first entree into the presidency of Russia. When he started getting worried about his power, he went to war in Georgia. killed many Georgians, killed many soldiers, took over parts of Georgia. When he was worried about his power again, in 2014, he took Crimea, invaded eastern Ukraine. This is not out of character. This is what he does. And so the only thing that's different about these events that are going on right now is not what Putin is doing, is how the West is reacting.
Yes. Well, this is the thing, isn't it? You're right. There have been plenty of tells. Everyone's gone, oh, Europe's been peaceful. He's been, peaceful for X number of years. But that's not been the case. You've highlighted what's happened, the takeover of, Crimea and eastern Ukraine most recently before this adventure. But why have we been so prepared to tolerate this situation?
Well, I think that there's been this, first of all, it's information. We finally figured out the information game that he plays. So, for example, in Georgia, the Russians had a narrative. They said the Georgians started firing first.
Oh, what a surprise! We've heard this one, right?
And half the people believed them. And so we couldn't get our act together with all our allies to say, well, here's what we want to do about Georgia. So that whole information game was solved because the Americans took a different approach. They took their intelligence, which was good intelligence, and they repeated it every day for 2 months, saying the Russians are going to invade, the Russians are going to invade, the Russians are going to invade. And so by the time Putin came up with his narrative saying whatever he was saying, nobody believed a word of it because it was so obvious that was a lie. So that was very, very important part of the whole thing. And so the other thing which has happened is you had a bunch of countries, Germany primarily, that said, we want to just keep him quiet, just like try to gently deal with him. We don't think this American approach, this Anglo-Saxon approach, is the right way of going about it. And the appeasement didn't work. He started a major, major land war. And I think the Germans, were on both the national level, but also the chancellor level. The chancellor went to him and said, don't invade. He said, I'm not going to invade. What are you talking about? These are just military exercises. So he lied to the chancellor and then did it. And so it was such an insult that the Germans finally came around and started acting like, a normal, government when it came to such an outrageous set of actions. And so we have both the appeasers who stopped appeasing and the information, which was absolutely clear. And that allowed the West to line up and do what's being done right now, which is unprecedented.
Yes, it is. We're going to come to the reaction in a second. I just wanted to ask one more question about the preamble. How much of the European position about all let's do it quietly was down to the whole, the gas and oil situation, and it's just easier to trade with him than to fight him? Was there a sense of complacency on that score?
There's no question that everyone said, it's going to cost us, so Fukushima happened. We don't want nuclear reactors.
Yeah.
Okay, so no more nuclear. We're going to go for gas. And then they're saying energy, clean energy is more important, or non-nuclear energy is more important than Russia. When I think everyone's realizing that if we end up having a nuclear war with Russia, we're not going to have a planet to enjoy our clean energy in.
Yes, of course. There's the tragedy there. Okay, so we come to the immediate run-up to the conflict. The West is releasing intelligence day in, day out. So we knew what he was up to. And yet, you've quite rightly pointed out there's been an unprecedented response. But up to the point of the invasion, the response was very weak. We were just saying, he's invading, he's going to invade. We knew the plans, he telegraphed the position, and we did precious little. Did we make a mistake in not getting our act together sooner? Because had we acted sooner, could we have deterred him in your view? Or was he always going to do this regardless of what we did?
He's a tactician, he's not a strategist. And I come from the world of investing. That's my original life. And there is a saying that past performance is not necessarily a predictor of the future.
Yes.
So in his mind, he looked at past performance. Okay, he looked at past performance and said they didn't do anything when I did Georgia.
That's right. Yeah.
They didn't do anything. Crimea didn't do anything. When I took down MH17, they didn't do anything after the Novichok and Salisbury. They're not going to do anything when they're not going to be able to agree with each other. They're not going to do anything. And so he was of the view that we weren't going to do anything. And so what would have been the right thing to do is not unleash the whole package of sanctions, but unleash enough of the sanctions. I had recommended, I was screaming from the rooftops for a month before the invasion, sanction 5 oligarchs just to show him we're serious.
Sure.
And if we had done that, he would say, okay, maybe past performance isn't a predictor of the future. But he was of the impression, and he miscalculated. He miscalculated on the Western reaction. He also miscalculated on the Ukrainian reaction. He had no idea the Ukrainians were going to fight so hard and fight so viciously.
So he really thought he was going to walk in and it would all be over in 5 minutes.
Yep. And one could have predicted that he was wrong on that easily based on Georgia. If you looked at the whole, he barely won. Big Russia, little Georgia, he barely won. I mean, it was they were like having traffic jams in the tunnel going into Georgia. There was also every problem they could have had. They had. It was not the easiest clean sweep into Georgia, and Ukraine is a much more complicated place to deal with. A big country, and the Ukrainians have had 8 years in which to perfect their military skills because they've been at it with the Russians in eastern Ukraine.
That is true, and of course, as you quite rightly pointed out, Ukraine is not Georgia, but equally the Russian forces are not what they were in 2008. He's got a lot of firepower he can bring to bear. We're seeing already how he's trying to decimate Kharkiv. We're seeing the massive convoy move inexorably closer to Kiev. How do you see this playing out on a military level now? Do you really think the Ukrainians can hold out against this kind of level without extra Western help?
No, I don't think they can. I think they're going to put up a valiant fight, but they're truly outgunned. And now there's many different features of the fight.
Yes.
So, the Russians have 14,000 tanks, and that becomes totally neutralized with the Javelin missiles that U.S. and U.K. provided them with.
Absolutely.
All of a sudden, that doesn't work anymore. A tank is actually a liability, not an asset. If some guy can put a javelin on his shoulder and take out the tank and then block the road so all the rest of the tanks become sitting ducks, and that's what's been happening. We also have provided Stinger missiles to take out aircraft, and so it hasn't been a totally unfair fight. And as you say, we were slow off the mark in terms of helping, but now there's a whole bunch of help coming in, and so but here's the problem. Putin, after the first 5 days of this, Putin looks weak. He doesn't look like this invincible, unbelievable, dangerous country that he's managing. It looks a bit incompetent. They run out of gas. Soldiers are turning around. They're getting bombarded with these Javelin missiles. Their planes are going down with special forces in them. According to some statistics I've read, the Russians have lost 3,000 soldiers in the first 5 days. That hasn't been verified. I don't want to.
Some say more, some say less, but there's clearly a loss of some kind.
That is the same number of troops that Russia lost in Chechnya, in the whole Chechen campaign. That's 25% of the number of troops they lost after 9.5 years in Afghanistan. And so that makes Russia look bad. That makes Putin. That's humiliating.
So what does he do with that? Isn't the danger that he then
Putin doesn't do humiliation.
No.
And that's like the worst thing you can do to Putin. And by the way, we should do it and we should humiliate him every possibility. But from a Putin perspective, and I know this guy because I've been fighting with him in my own way for 10 years, he doesn't do humiliation well. And so what is he going to do? He's got to come out swinging. He's got to do crazy stuff to show that he's dominant, that he's the alpha male, that he's the one you can't mess with, because he can't look weak. And so what we're seeing right now is that exact thing, that these thermobaric bombs that they dropped yesterday, the attacking this explosion in the main square in Kharkiv, a civilian attack, and the TV tower in Kiev, and so on and so forth. And what I really am scared of is that, and we've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in Chechnya, is when they decide to really go, scorched earth. And he has again, past performance doesn't necessarily predict future, but I have no reason to believe that he wouldn't do scorched earth, and particularly because he's been humiliated.
Yeah, that's a great fear, obviously. Now, we're going to come to people's comments at home in a moment, but one last question. You've said, of course, we've had an unprecedented response. Can we and should we be doing more right now? And if so, what areas would you like to see action on?
So where we are today is like light years away from where we are a week ago, exactly a week ago.
It's actually light years, yeah.
I've never seen anything like it in my entire life. I've never, all the apologists in the world have disappeared. It's unbelievable. And what we have now is a pretty tough sanctions program. And I'll tell you where the weaknesses are in a second, but we have sanctions, we've frozen the assets of the Central Bank of Russia.
Yep. That's
dramatic. We've cut off 70% of the Russian banks from SWIFT. That's dramatic. We've sanctioned Sberbank, Veneshtorg Bank, Gazprom, Surgutneftegas, and a whole list.
And the list goes on, yeah.
And a list goes on and on and on and on. In fact, the sanctions are coming in so fast and furious. I haven't even been able to memorize them. I mean, I'm a connoisseur of sanctions.
Yes.
And we've now started sanctioning Russian oligarchs. The EU put a list together last night, which has got some real high-value targets on it. The US has come out with some. UK has been a little slower, as it always is. The oligarchs are, I mean, one of my favorite stories right now is this mad scramble of moving yachts out of, the Kaliningrad port is going to be like Monaco pretty soon.
Because they're going
to part. I mean, it's going to be ridiculous. There's going to be this like traffic jam of yachts in Kaliningrad
before they get seized.
Before they get seized. I heard of one oligarch who parked his yacht in Saudi Arabia.
Interesting choice.
So the ruble has collapsed. Mm-hmm. People can't get hard currency out of the bank. They've restricted the conversion of hard currency. You can't sell securities on the stock market. I believe that there's going to be corporate defaults. There's a huge amount of corporate debt that will come due, and they won't have the
ability to pay it back.
The ability to pay it back. There's no central bank money to support all these corporations, which they had done in previous times. And so we've also learned from our mistakes in terms of how to sanction them. And the oligarchs are now starting to be sanctioned. So what needs to be done further?
Yes.
Why sanction 70% of the Russian banks, or why disconnect 70%, not 100%? What would I do if I was Vladimir Putin? I'd say, okay, let's route all payments through the 30% of the banks. Yeah. No brainer. So let's sanction the 30%. And then the most important thing we can do is viciously go after the oligarchs. Mm-hmm. And not just 3 or 4, but like 50 or 100.
So go after all the regime-linked people, basically.
Because that's where all the money is, the offshore money. Go after that. And that's Putin's money.
Yes.
And we go after that, and Putin can't get money from abroad. He has no access to his money domestically. He's burning through billions of dollars a day with this military campaign. And eventually he's going to run out of money. And we want him to run out of money. I mean, the Ukrainians are doing God's work. Yes. They're doing God's work for us. They're the buffer between Russia and NATO, because he's going to come for the Estonian border or wherever. And the Ukrainians are protecting us by fighting the Russians. And so we should supply them with every weapon they demand. We should provide whatever medical, financial assistance they need. We should welcome the refugees openly and supportively in the West. And we should squeeze Russia's finances so that they can't afford to do this, and hope that the Ukrainians can hold them off and wear down their resources.
While we're doing the same internationally as well.
Exactly.
Great. Right. We're going to go to calls. We've got a call from Klaus as our first caller. Klaus, you should be online. Let us hear what you've got to say.
Is that me?
Yes. Go right ahead.
Okay. Yeah, what I've been watching this very closely, and I wonder what could stop it. The only thing which could stop it, I think, is that Putin loses power. And I don't see any sign that we'll succeed in doing that within the next weeks or months. So is that right or wrong that I think so?
Thank you, Klaus. Let's dig into that. So what's the chance of him losing power, as Klaus has asked?
Well, Klaus is right. Putin has no reverse gear. He has no capacity to back down. He has no ability to show weakness. And so he's got to move forward and continue moving forward. There's no way for him to stop. If he stops, he gets overthrown. So he's in it for the long haul. And we can't in any way.
We're not going to have regime change from here. Yeah.
Well, and nor can we in any way, try to like appease him in any way. We have to continue harder and harder and harder. And so there's another way we can stop him other than him being overthrown or whatever by his own people. And that is to bleed him dry of all of his resources. And so he literally cannot afford to do this. That's how the Soviet Union ended. We bled them dry. And that's the only sort of safe option for how to deal with him right now.
And that might lead to his toppling. Okay, noted. Debbie is next. Debbie, are you there? Would you come on screen? Yes. Hello, Debbie.
Oh, Debbie, you're wanted.
we've got another half of Debbie on here. Debbie, are you there?
You're wanted. You're on screen.
An unlikely Debbie who came on screen there.
This is Debbie.
Sorry.
Hello, Debbie. Right. What's your question?
I just wanted to know whether Mr. Browder would think that in reality, would they ever take 100% of the banks sanctioned?
Okay, so
it's a good question. Yeah. So why only 70%?
Yes.
Well, I guarantee you there must be some reason there's some dirty backroom, smoky, dark place where some negotiation took place, where someone's got an economic interest, and this was like one of these fudges that happens. And to answer Debbie's question, we will absolutely 100% go after all the banks when the next atrocity happens. I mean,
right. That's key, isn't it?
And so, Putin is the best advocate for tougher sanctions because he will do something so outrageous and so horrible and so unforgivable that we have no choice but to just keep on squeezing him. And it's really important for everybody to understand that this is going to be a costly exercise for us. It's going to be a financially costly exercise. There's no way that we're not going to have to bear a cost for this whole thing. But the financial cost, it will be de minimis compared to the international security cost if we end up having to be in a direct conflict with Russia when he finally gets done with Ukraine. And so everything we can possibly do now to prevent that, we should do at whatever cost.
So it's pay a little now or pay a lot tomorrow.
Or pay a lot now versus paying
infinitely amount tomorrow. Fine. Our next questioner, we have Anthony. Anthony, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please ask what would you like to ask? Yeah.
My question is to what extent is China involved in this, and is Putin a puppet of the Chinese?
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Right, the China equation. All sorts of stories about what China knew beforehand, what they didn't, and what they might be after. What's your view, Bill, on this?
Well, so everybody says China and Russia are partners in all these awful things going on in the world. And I would say that they're not partners. I would describe them, if you look back in history, there was an organization called the Comintern, the Communist International. And so what we have today is the Authoritarian International with China and Russia and Iran and other really...
wasn't it once called the Axis of Evil?
That's a different one. That was more recent.
Yes.
So you have the Authoritarian International, and none of these people have they're not natural allies. So Russia and China should be enemies, and Russia has all the resources, China has all the people. They should be fighting over those resources, and they will be in some, in some decade in the future.
Yeah.
However, China China will be the lender of last resort. So when Russia runs out of money, it's not like there's no place to go for money.
Yes, we can see where they'll go, yeah.
They're going to go to China, and China is going to say, interesting. Okay, we can lend you a bit of money. Maybe 25% per annum. Kind of, it's like borrowing on your credit card.
Sure.
And by the way, with that pipeline, I think that would be a good thing to pledge, and we'd like that oil field to be pledged as well. And the Russians aren't going to have any choice because they're going to be so desperate for the money. So China is going to be there for the money. Not a lot of money, but enough money to tide them over. China will also be there to help veto things at the United Nations and so on and so forth. China will be there to play games in the middle, hosting a peace conference or whatever, even though there's Putin has no intention of offering any peace. But there's an interesting angle in China, which I want to mention, which is that everybody is watching what's going to happen here, and for different reasons. We're watching it because it's the freedom of the democratic world. The Chinese are watching it to say, well, I wonder what's going to happen if we were to decide to do the same thing in Taiwan.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you know what? What the Chinese have seen in the last 48 hours, they're not going to do a major military invasion of Taiwan. They might do some kind of Hong Kong, slow rope-a-dope thing, but they're not going to do, all guns blazing military invasion because they don't want to be isolated the same way as Russia has been isolated.
Well, it's important, actually, that message is given clearly because, as you stated, they were watching this to see how it would react. And
it's very important that this is not just we're not just communicating with Vladimir Putin here. We're communicating with anybody else who's thinking about doing this.
Who's trying something else? Yeah, noted. Will, a question from Will.
Hello. So I fully support sanctions as well as other things. And I saw the other day in the news that BP decided that they were going to exit Russia, and that's going to cost them. There's going to be a charge of up to 25 billion, a huge cost to them. And we're seeing a lot of Western companies exit their Russian positions, often at a cost. When you think that the value that these companies bring isn't diminished necessarily just by an investor exiting and maybe filled by Chinese or other Russian companies, to what extent is this harming us that Western companies have less influence over Russian companies?
Okay, you'll know all about this.
I know all about this. So it's a good question. So one of the things people have asked me today is who's going to buy all this stuff? And the answer is there'll be Russian investors that will buy it 95% down. Western investors won't be able to buy it because it's all sanctioned. Russian investors will buy it 95% down. So, and they will be making a bet that at some point either Putin won't be in power, or he'll win the war, or something
will change,
and something will change, and that their 95% goes back to 100 cents on the dollar, and they make 20 times their money. It's a very ballsy bet, but one which could pay off very handsomely for them. So the questioner was right to say that this could be a direct transfer of wealth from Western corporations to some Russian in the future. I mean that's an inevitable consequence of this. Having said that, if we look at how regimes change, not just Putin, but philosophies of regimes and so on, the way that the apartheid regime ended was because of a total disinvestment by the Western companies of South African assets. And I could have never imagined BP jettisoning Rosneft. I mean, in any circumstances, I could have never imagined that. Maersk Shipping says they're no longer going to pick up containers or drop off containers in Russia. FedEx, no packages. Warner Brothers, no movies. On and on and on and on. And by the way, and this is just the beginning. It's going to turn into a tidal wave. There's not going to be a single Western company trading with Russia by the time this is all said and done. And that could break loose this logjam. People are saying, will there be a recession in Russia? I'm not predicting a recession. I'm predicting a depression. It's going to be, and I predict corporate defaults, and I predict total currency controls, and it's going to be a disaster for them
in that way.
And that disaster may ultimately lead through something that nobody can predict. Is people say, will Putin's oligarchs take him out? No, that's not going to happen. But who knows? Will there be an uprising? Nobody knows. But what we do know is that we can't allow this guy to do what he's doing, and we have to inflict the maximum possible pressure. And I'm really glad to see these Western companies who never showed any morality before now succumbing.
Well, Bill, you've left us with a positive note at least. I mean, at the end of the day, that's all we can hope for, that we can have action that will resist aggression and will, of course, deter future aggression and may well lead to the fall of this quite evil regime. Bill, thank you for joining me in the studio today. Thank you all for joining us at home as well. We'll be back next week for another edition of The Scoop. See you all there.